The doorbell rang. The lawyer walked in, carrying an old, worn briefcase. My daughter-in-law rushed forward, her voice sharp. "He's just playing games. One signature, and the company will belong to Daniel." But the lawyer placed an envelope on the table, his eyes grave. "No. Today I'm here to reveal a truth, one that none of you ever expected." The air grew thick, my heart pounding like a hammer. What secret will crush their ambitions? Follow the channel so you won't miss what happens next. My name is Arthur Miller. I am 61 years old, though some mornings, when the Chicago winds bite through the bones, I feel closer to 70. My hair has turned the color of salt and pepper. My shoulders have lost the arrogance of youth, but my height and frame still carry me with a certain dignity. People used to call me a workhorse, an engineer who never stopped until the foundations were set, the steel beams welded, the walls raised. That same discipline carried me through decades, building Miller Construction from nothing into a company worth over $12 million. But if you ask me what I'm proudest of, it's not the millions. It was Linda, my wife of 35 years. Linda was the kind of woman who filled a house with warmth without ever trying. She raised our son Daniel mostly on her own, while I spent 18-hour days at construction sites. She never complained, never accused me of neglecting my family. Instead, she turned our modest suburban house into a sanctuary. She had this tradition of keeping roses, red ones, in a porcelain vase on my desk, a reminder that even if I was building skyscrapers downtown, home was where the real foundation stood. When she passed away, 3 weeks ago, the house felt like an empty shell. The roses withered. The silence grew heavier than any concrete beam I had ever lifted. So when Daniel and his wife Caroline stormed into the study that afternoon, demanding answers about the inheritance, it felt like a betrayal layered upon grief. They didn't see the bookshelves lined with Linda's old cookbooks, or the crystal globe we bought in Ireland during our 20th anniversary trip, or the family photograph from Daniel's graduation where Linda's eyes sparkled with pride. No, all they saw was money numbers, assets, property. The very walls of my study, once a sanctuary of memory, became a battlefield. Daniel, my only son, was 33 years old. Sharp suits, expensive watches, polished shoes, but beneath the surface, I often wondered if he ever grew past being that spoiled boy who expected life to bend in his favor. I had given him too much, perhaps. Paid for the best schools, the newest cars, even covered the rent for his first apartment downtown. Linda often whispered, "Arthur, you're protecting him too much. He needs to struggle just a little." But a father's heart is weak in front of his son, and I always folded, always hoping Daniel would rise when the time was right. Caroline was a different story. Blonde, refined, always immaculately dressed. To outsiders, she looked like the perfect wife, but I had seen through the facade long ago. She had married Daniel not for love, but for the life she thought he could give her. And when Linda's funeral was barely over, Caroline already sharpened her claws, circling me with that smile of entitlement. She wanted the company handed over like a wrapped present, as if decades of blood and sweat could be reduced to a line on a will. What cut me deeper was Daniel's silence. He sat there, watching me, but his eyes, those eyes that once lit up when I taught him how to ride a bike in the front yard, were cold, distant, almost unrecognizable. It wasn't just Caroline speaking that day. It was Daniel agreeing with every word, letting her voice echo his own hidden greed. I looked around my study, searching for strength in objects that had once been ordinary. The old oak desk, scarred with scratches from years of use, felt like a companion, standing steady under pressure, just as it always had. On the shelf behind me, the photo from Daniel's 10th birthday stared back, his cheeks smeared with chocolate cake, Linda laughing beside him. That boy, that woman, they seemed galaxies away from the people in front of me now. And I wondered, had I failed them both? Caroline leaned forward, her perfume filling the air, sharp and artificial. "Arthur, you can't run a company forever. You're old. Daniel is ready. He deserves it." She made it sound like I was some outdated piece of machinery to be retired, tossed aside. My chest burned, but my face remained calm. Years of negotiations with stubborn city officials had taught me the art of silence. Let the other person speak, dig their own grave with words, and then strike with truth. I thought of my employees, men like Tony Fernandez and Jim Sullivan. They weren't just workers, they were family. Tony, who lost his wife to cancer and still showed up every morning at 5. Jim, who carried the weight of 3 children through night shifts and still managed to whistle on the job. These were the men who helped me build Miller Construction, brick by brick. And now Caroline, with her manicured nails and designer dress, wanted to throw them away like broken tools. To her, they were burdens. To me, they were the backbone of everything. I clenched my hands under the desk, unseen. Linda used to say, "Arthur, don't let anger write your words. Breathe first." So I breathed. Outside, the autumn wind rattled against the window panes, as if reminding me that storms pass, but damage remains if you're not careful. Daniel finally spoke, his voice sharp, rehearsed. "Dad, Mom told me once that you were too sentimental in business. She said you should let go of emotions and think about profits. That's why you should pass the company to me." The lie pierced me. Linda had never said such a thing. If anything, she was the reason I treated employees like family, the reason Miller Construction was known for loyalty, not just profit margins. And yet here was my son, twisting her memory, bending her words into a weapon. My jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw Daniel not as my boy, but as a stranger wearing his face. I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath me. My hand slipped into the drawer, touching the sealed envelope I had placed there days ago. Inside was the truth I had carried in silence for decades, a truth that could shatter Daniel's confidence, strip Caroline of her arrogance, and rewrite the very script they thought they were controlling. But not yet. Timing was everything. I closed the drawer softly, looking at them both. "You two seem to have it all figured out," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. "But there are things you don't know yet." The air thickened. Caroline shifted uncomfortably, her smirk faltering for the first time. Daniel frowned, as if unsure whether I was bluffing. Outside, the shadows grew longer across the yard, and I felt Linda's presence in that silence, urging me to stand tall, to let truth speak louder than greed. And so I waited, because soon the lawyer would arrive, and when he did, the storm would break. Daniel broke the silence with a voice sharper than I remembered. "Dad, it's time you retired. You've done enough. The company belongs to the next generation now. To me." He said it as though it was the most natural thing in the world, like passing down an old coat. His tone carried no gratitude, no recognition of the years I had sacrificed, only the assumption that my work existed for his convenience. I studied him, trying to reconcile the boy I once lifted on my shoulders with the man sitting across from me now. He wore a navy suit, tailored to perfection, the kind of suit that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches, not sweat and grit. His hair was slicked back, his cologne strong, and yet beneath the polished exterior I saw something fragile, an insecurity masked by entitlement. Perhaps Caroline had polished him into this version of himself. Perhaps I had. Caroline didn't let him finish before she jumped in, her words dripping with disdain. "Arthur, you're clinging to the past. Linda, God rest her soul, wouldn't want you struggling alone at your age. Daniel is ready. Why hold on to a company you can't possibly manage anymore? You should think of yourself for once. Enjoy the rest of your days in peace." She emphasized the word peace as if it were a threat disguised as kindness. Inside me, something boiled. Linda's memory, so fresh, so raw, was being manipulated, twisted into a weapon. This woman had the audacity to call my wife the old lady only minutes ago, and now she dared to claim she knew what Linda wanted. I clenched my teeth, but I refused to let my anger speak. Anger would only give them ground to stand on. I thought of the nights I spent drafting blueprints under the dim light of a desk lamp, the mornings when I left before sunrise, while Linda stayed behind, holding Daniel's hand as he got ready for school. I thought of the 18-hour shifts, the blisters on my palms, The winters when my breath froze in the air as I stood on skeletal steel beams high above the city. Every brick of Miller construction carried a piece of me, and now they wanted me to sign it away like an unwanted relic. I kept my face still, my voice even. "So you believe the company should be yours, Daniel?" He nodded quickly, like a child grabbing candy offered freely. "Yes, you've worked hard, but it's time for me to take over. I'll bring new ideas, fresh leadership. Times have changed, Dad." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my chest. Fresh leadership? The only thing fresh about Daniel's leadership was Caroline whispering into his ear, feeding him lines that sounded rehearsed. My son, my flesh and blood or so I thought, was sitting there parroting someone else's ambition. Caroline leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "We've also been talking about the warehouses, Arthur. They're prime real estate. Imagine what we could get if we sold them. Those old workers. You insist on keeping, what are their names? Tony? Jim? They're draining resources. Daniel and I believe it's time to cut unnecessary costs." Her words struck like a whip. Tony Fernandez, who had been with me since the beginning, who once carried steel beams on his shoulders until his knees nearly buckled. Jim Sullivan, who showed up even on Christmas Eve to finish a project so a family could move into their new home on schedule. To Caroline, they were unnecessary costs. To me, they were the very reason Miller Construction stood tall today. I forced a smile, though my insides twisted. "And you believe Linda would have wanted this? Selling warehouses? Firing men who have worked with us for decades?" Caroline's lips curled into a smirk. "Linda was a practical woman. She must have seen how sentimental you are. Sometimes sentiment is a weakness in business." That was the breaking point. I couldn't hold back the fire rising inside. Linda, my Linda, had been many things, but never cold, never practical in the way Caroline described. She was heart, compassion, warmth. She was the one who insisted on paying for Tony's daughter's college when he couldn't afford tuition. She was the one who made sure Jim's family had groceries when his wife fell ill. For Caroline to rewrite her memory like this, it was unforgivable. I looked at Daniel, hoping for a flicker of resistance, a sign that he would correct his wife, defend his mother's honor. But his eyes were steady, aligned with hers. That was when I saw it clearly. My son was no longer standing beside me, he was standing against me. The study grew colder, the late afternoon light slipping behind clouds. Shadows stretched across the floor like dark fingers, reaching toward the three of us. The walls, once filled with memories, now closed in like prison bars. I felt trapped, not by the room, but by the betrayal seated across from me. I leaned back, folding my hands. Outwardly, I was calm. Inside, I was raging, every nerve set on fire. "You two seem to have it all figured out," I said softly, almost too softly. Caroline's smirk wavered. Daniel frowned. I let the silence breathe, heavy and uncomfortable. Then I added, "But there are things you don't know yet." Describe. The words hung in the air like smoke, unspoken meaning wrapping around us all. Caroline's fingers twitched against the chair's armrest, and for the first time since she entered, her confidence faltered. Daniel looked at me, confusion flickering across his features. I didn't say more. Some truths are like thunder. You hear the rumble before the storm arrives, and they would hear it soon enough. Caroline was relentless, her words sharp enough to strip paint from the walls. "Arthur, let's be honest here. You've carried this company on your back long enough. But times change. Loyalty doesn't pay the bills. Those old men you keep on payroll, they're dead weight. Tony Fernandez, Jim Sullivan. Men like them belong in retirement homes, not on construction sites. If you're serious about profits, you'll let Daniel make the cuts that should have been made years ago." I felt my jaw tighten, my pulse hammering in my temples. Tony's laughter echoed in my mind, the sound of him cracking jokes on bitter winter mornings to keep the crew's spirits alive. Jim's steady whistle returned to me, the soundtrack of scaffolding and steel rising against the skyline. These men weren't dead weight, they were pillars, holding up the very company Caroline and Daniel now demanded like spoiled children reaching for candy. I stared at her, studying the cold determination in her eyes. She didn't see human beings. She saw numbers, costs, liabilities. To her, the decades of loyalty, the sacrifices, the funerals we had all attended together, none of it mattered. She wanted efficiency, not legacy, profit, not people. And Daniel, my son, sat there nodding along, every agreement another knife twisting into my chest. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady but lacking conviction. "Dad, you can't let emotions dictate business. Mom told me once you were too sentimental. She said you needed to think with your head, not your heart." It was a lie. I knew it the moment he said it. Linda had never uttered those words. She had been my anchor, my reminder that business was not just about steel and cement, but about the people who carried them. It was Linda who brought coffee to the crew on freezing mornings, who remembered their children's birthdays, who insisted we treat our employees not as workers but as family. For Daniel to twist her memory this way, to use her name as justification for cruelty, it was a betrayal I had not prepared my heart to face. The study seemed to close in around me. The shelves that once brought me comfort now towered like silent witnesses. The portrait of Linda above the fireplace watched us all, her smile frozen in time, her eyes full of a compassion that felt like a rebuke to everything being said in this room. My fingers curled into fists under the desk. Caroline leaned back, crossing her arms with the smugness of someone who believed victory was already sealed. "So, Arthur, why fight the inevitable? You're tired, you're old. Let Daniel take the reins, sign the papers, start enjoying what little time you have left." Her words were poison wrapped in silk. For a moment, I wanted to shout, to slam my fists on the desk, to unleash the storm that raged inside me. But then I remembered Linda's voice, calm and steady. "Arthur, don't let anger write your words. Breathe first." And so I breathed. Deeply, slowly. When I opened my eyes, I no longer saw Caroline's smirk or Daniel's indifference. I saw the truth that had been locked away for decades, a truth that had slept in silence but was ready to awaken. My hand slipped into the drawer, closing around the sealed envelope. The weight of it was heavier than any steel beam, for within it lay not only science but revelation. I placed it gently on the desk, the thud echoing like a gavel striking in court. Both Daniel and Caroline froze, their eyes narrowing, curiosity breaking through their arrogance. "What's that?" Daniel asked, his tone half suspicious, half dismissive. I let the corner of my mouth lift into the faintest smile. "Something you'll want to hear. But not from me, from the lawyer. He'll be here shortly." Caroline laughed, a high, brittle sound. "A lawyer? Arthur, don't be dramatic. What could possibly be in that envelope that changes the fact you're too old to run this company?" I didn't answer. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They need to be unveiled at the right moment, like a curtain rising on a stage. So I sat back, folding my hands, letting the silence grow thick. Daniel shifted in his seat, glancing at Caroline, uncertainty flickering in his eyes for the first time that day. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging like an eternity. The autumn wind rattled the windows, the branches outside scratching against the glass like fingernails. My heart pounded, not with fear but with anticipation. For 33 years I had carried this secret, and now, in the wake of Linda's death, with greed bearing its fangs before me, I knew the time had come. Caroline tried to regain her footing, her voice rising with false confidence. "Whatever game you're playing, Arthur, it won't change the facts. Daniel is your son, your only son, and when you're gone, everything will belong to him, whether you like it or not." Her words hung in the air, and I felt the irony bite at me. Your only son, if only she knew. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the room like thunder. Caroline jumped slightly, startled, while Daniel frowned, confused. I remained still, my eyes fixed on the envelope resting between us. "The lawyer is here," I said calmly. "Now the truth begins." The chime of the doorbell lingered in the air like a warning bell. None of us moved at first. Caroline's smirk faltered, Daniel's brow furrowed, and I simply sat back, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I rose from my chair, each step measured, deliberate, as I crossed the study and opened the door. There stood David Harper, my attorney for over 20 years. Tall, graying at the temples, his leather briefcase worn at the corners, he carried with him the weight of countless contracts, disputes, and settlements. But today, what he carried was heavier than all of that combined. "Arthur," he said with a nod, stepping inside. His eyes scanned the room, pausing on Daniel and Caroline. He knew the atmosphere before a word was spoken. He could smell conflict the way a sailor smells an oncoming storm. "David," I greeted, motioning him toward the desk. I returned to my chair as he settled into the seat beside me, placing his briefcase on the polished wood with a quiet thump. Caroline leaned forward immediately, her tone sharp. "Finally, someone sensible. Arthur has been playing games. He thinks waving around an envelope will change the reality of this situation. Maybe you can convince him to do what's right and hand over the company." David arched an eyebrow, his lips twitching with the faintest smile. "That's not why I'm here." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Then why are you here?" David opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents with practiced precision. His movements were calm, almost ritualistic, but the tension in the room snapped tighter with each rustle of paper. Finally, he set the documents down, resting his hands on them, as though bracing for impact. "Arthur has entrusted me with something important," David began, his voice steady. "Something he has kept private for many years. Today, he has chosen to reveal it." Caroline rolled her eyes, but there was a flicker of unease in her expression. "Please, spare us the dramatics. Just get on with it." David ignored her, his gaze steady on Daniel. "These," he said, tapping the sealed envelope I had placed on the desk, "are the results of a DNA test." The words froze the air. Daniel blinked, confusion rippling across his face. Caroline's hands twitched against the armrest, her knuckles whitening. What do you mean?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking slightly. David unfolded the envelope slowly, as though peeling back decades of silence. "Arthur requested this test some years ago. The results are conclusive. Daniel," he paused, his eyes softening, though his voice remained firm. "You are not Arthur's biological son." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel stared at David, then at me, his face draining of color. His lips parted, but no words came. Caroline, usually quick with her tongue, sat frozen, her eyes wide with shock. I watched them, my heart heavy but resolute. This was the truth I had carried since Daniel was 7 years old. I had known, yet I had chosen to raise him as my own, chosen to give him my name, my love, my life's work. Because fatherhood, to me, was never about blood. It was about presence, sacrifice, and devotion. Finally, Daniel found his voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. That can't be true." "It is," I said softly, my voice calm but weighted with decades of pain. "I found out years ago, but I made a choice. I decided that no matter what, you were my son. I raised you, Daniel. Every lesson, every sacrifice, every ounce of love, it was real. Nothing changes that." Caroline snapped out of her shock, her voice sharp, almost desperate. "If he's not your son, then what does that mean for the inheritance, for the company?" Her words cut deeper than she realized. At that moment, she revealed her true concern. It wasn't Daniel's identity, or the decades of lies, or the weight of revelation. It was money. Pure, simple greed. David spoke before I could respond. "Legally, Miller Construction has always belonged solely to Arthur. Without a will explicitly naming Daniel as heir, he has no claim to the company. Ever." Caroline's face blanched, the color draining from her cheeks. She turned to Daniel, panic flickering in her eyes. "Say something, do something." But Daniel just sat there, his entire world collapsing around him. His eyes darted between me and David, searching for a crack, a loophole. a lie he could cling to. But there was none. I leaned forward, my voice steady, each word deliberate. You see, Caroline, Linda's death changes nothing, because the truth has always been here, waiting. You thought you could twist her memory, rewrite her words, but truth cannot be buried forever. And today, it stands before you. Daniel lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders trembling. For the first time in years, I saw him not as a polished man in a tailored suit, but as a broken boy, lost and vulnerable. And though my heart ached, I knew this was necessary. Sometimes a foundation must be shattered before it can be rebuilt. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Caroline's breathing grew rapid, sharp, as if she were trapped. I could almost hear the calculations racing through her mind, the crumbling of her carefully constructed facade. Then, with a voice trembling between anger and fear, she asked the question that would define the path ahead. So, if Daniel isn't your son, what happens now? David's words still echoed like a verdict that had already been carved into stone. Daniel has no legal claim to the company, ever. For a long moment, no one moved. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, each second dragging across the silence. Caroline's face contorted, a cocktail of disbelief and rage. Daniel sat motionless, his eyes unfocused, his lips parted as though he wanted to speak but had forgotten how. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the desk, the wood cool beneath my skin. My voice was calm but weighted with years of unspoken truths. Daniel, I need you to understand something. This secret, your blood, your origin, I've carried it since you were 7 years old. I didn't want you to live under the shadow of it. I didn't want you to feel less than. So I buried it in my heart. I remember the night I found out, clearer than I remember most birthdays. I was working late at the office when I came across papers your mother never meant for me to see. The truth was like a hammer to the chest. I sat there until dawn, staring at your photograph on my desk, wondering what it meant. And then, when morning came, you padded into the kitchen with your hair sticking up, clutching your toy truck, calling me Dad like nothing had changed. And in that moment I knew nothing had changed. You were my son, because love made you so. Daniel blinked rapidly, his breathing shallow. He looked at me, searching my face for something, anger, bitterness, resentment, but all he found was truth. His lips trembled. You knew all this time. And you still, his voice broke. You still raised me. I nodded slowly. Every scraped knee, every game of catch in the backyard, every sacrifice Linda and I made, it was real. I didn't see you as a burden or a lie. I saw you as my boy, and I always will. For a brief moment, the hardness in his expression cracked. Behind the polished exterior, I glimpsed the vulnerable child I once held, the boy who believed his father could fix anything. But the moment was fleeting. Caroline's voice sliced through the air, dragging him back. This is absurd, she snapped, her voice pitched high with panic. So what if biology doesn't match? Daniel has lived his whole life as your son. That makes him the rightful heir. You can't just decide he gets nothing. David straightened the papers in front of him, his tone measured. Legally, Caroline, the company has always belonged solely to Arthur. Unless Arthur explicitly wills it otherwise, Daniel is not entitled to ownership. The law is very clear. Caroline turned scarlet, her fists clenching. The law? You're hiding behind technicalities. This company belongs to Daniel by right. You can't erase 33 years with one piece of paper. I locked eyes with her, my voice low but steady. The company belongs to those who build it, not those who wait for it to fall into their laps. She scoffed, but I didn't let her speak again. I shifted my gaze back to Daniel. Son, I won't hand you this company out of pity, nor will I strip you of the chance to earn it. If you truly want Miller Construction, you will prove yourself. Starting tomorrow, you work at the bottom with the crews. No corner office, no title, no luxury. You'll rise before dawn, lace up your boots, and sweat beside the men who've given decades of their lives to this company. For 5 years, you'll earn their respect, their trust, their belief that you belong here. If you succeed, I will hand you 51% of Miller Construction. If you fail, you walk away with nothing." The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of my challenge pressing down on us all. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. His voice was hoarse. "5 years. You expect me to do manual labor like some man who wants to lead?" I cut in, my words sharp as steel. "Leadership is not worn on a suit, Daniel. It's earned in the dirt, in the sweat, in the trust of those you lead. If you can't understand that, then you will never be fit to inherit this company." "Oh," Caroline shot to her feet, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her face twisted in outrage. "This is insane. 5 years of slave labor? You want to break him down, humiliate him, destroy him. Daniel is not some construction grunt, he's your heir. He deserves ownership now, without these ridiculous hoops to jump through." Her shrill voice bounced off the shelves, rattling against the glass of Linda's crystal globe. I waited until her words died out, then let the silence sharpen around her. Finally, I spoke, calm but cold. "Humiliation is stealing a company you didn't earn. Humiliation is firing loyal men because you see them as burdens. Humiliation is forging signatures on bank loans you never should have touched." The room froze. Caroline's face drained of color, her lips parting in shock. Daniel snapped his head toward her, confusion written across his features. "What is he talking about?" David slid a folder across the desk, his expression professional, unyielding. "Bank records. Caroline forged your signature for a loan of $250,000. She funneled it into a private scheme. The money is gone. Every cent." Daniel's face went slack, his jaw falling open. "Caroline, tell me this isn't true." Her lips trembled. She reached for his hand, desperation in her voice. I did it for us. I thought it was an opportunity, a way to secure our future. I didn't mean for it to." He yanked his hand back as though her touch burned. "You did this behind my back? You forged my name?" "I was trying to help," she cried, tears welling. "No," I cut in, my voice as cold as a blade. "You were trying to help yourself. You gambled with his name, his future, and you lost. And now, Daniel, you must decide what kind of man you will be. If you accept my challenge, I will pay the debt and give you the chance to prove yourself. If you refuse, I will not lift a finger. You will lose everything: this house, the company, even the respect of the men who once believed in you. 24 hours. That is all you have." The ticking clock filled the silence again, each second striking like a hammer. Caroline collapsed into her chair, her chest heaving, her mascara streaking as the mask of control slipped away. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the folder on the desk, the weight of betrayal heavy in his eyes. Slowly he rose to his feet, his movements stiff as though he carried 1,000 pounds on his shoulders. His voice was hollow. I need time to think." He turned toward the door, his steps unsteady. Caroline lunged after him, grabbing his arm. "Daniel, don't you dare walk away from me now. You're my husband. You owe me." He pulled free, his eyes dark with hurt. "I don't even know who you are anymore." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Caroline trembling, her fury turning inward. She spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "You'll regret this, Arthur. You've poisoned him against me." I didn't flinch. I stood, straightening my shoulders, my voice quiet but resolute. "No, Caroline. You poisoned yourself. And now the truth has simply caught up to you." "No." She stormed out, her heels clicking furiously down the hall, leaving the study in silence once more. I sank back into my chair, my body heavy with the weight of it all. The room was dim, the last light of day slipping away. I glanced at Linda's photograph on the shelf, her smile, eternal and kind, watching over me. For a moment, I closed my eyes, and I could almost hear her voice, whispering through the stillness. "Stand firm, Arthur. The boy must find his own way." And so I sat there, alone with the shadows, waiting for tomorrow. waiting to see if my son would choose the path of a man or the easy road to ruin. The house was unnaturally still after Caroline stormed out, her heels echoing down the hall like retreating gunfire. Only Daniel remained in the doorway, his hand resting against the frame as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. The lawyer, David, quietly organized his papers, but I could see the weight of the moment pressing against him too. Even a man accustomed to legal battles knew this was more than a case. This was a reckoning. Daniel turned back toward me, his face pale, his voice barely above a whisper. "So what you're saying is none of this?" He gestured vaguely at the study, the documents, the heavy shelves full of ledgers and blueprints. "None of this is mine?" I rose from my chair slowly, letting my words settle like stones on water. "Not by blood, not by law, but it can be yours if you decide to earn it." His eyes narrowed, a spark of anger flickering through the fog of confusion. "Earn it? After all these years of being your son, I still have to prove myself?" "Yes," my answer came without hesitation. "Because being my son by title and being a man worthy of this company are two different things. You can have my name, Daniel, but you must choose if you want my legacy." For a long moment, he said nothing, only stared at me with the expression of a man caught between pride and despair. Then, as though clinging to the last rope within reach, he blurted, "Caroline was right. You're humiliating me. You want me to start at the bottom like some man who earns respect." I interrupted, my tone sharp. "Do you know why Miller Construction survived recessions, strikes, bankruptcies that destroyed other companies? Because our men believed in me. Not because I had money, not because I had a title, but because I worked beside them. They knew I would bleed for them. If you want to lead them, you must do the same. Otherwise, they'll never follow you. And I will never hand this company to someone who doesn't know what loyalty means." David cleared his throat gently, his voice calm, almost like a mediator. "Daniel, your father's terms may sound harsh, but legally and morally, he is well within his rights. The choice is yours. But I will tell you this, few men are ever given such an opportunity. Most inherit nothing but debt and regret. You have the chance to earn something real." Daniel slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. The tension in his shoulders spoke louder than words. He was a man torn in half, one side tethered to his wife's ambitions, the other pulled by the weight of truth he could no longer ignore. I watched him in silence, giving him the space Linda would have wanted me to. My late wife had always been gentler, more forgiving than me. She would have held his hand, reassured him that the world hadn't ended. But Linda wasn't here anymore. It fell to me to be both the father who loved and the man who demanded. Finally, Daniel lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. "And if I refuse, if I walk away right now?" I didn't blink. "Then you walk away with nothing. Not the company, not the house, not my support. Caroline will have her claws in you, but I won't save you when she drags you down. I've paid her debts once already, and I won't do it again." His face darkened. "You knew?" I nodded. "I knew. Every cent of that $250,000 loan she forged under your name. I could have let the bank ruin you. Instead, I waited, because I wanted you to see the truth with your own eyes. I wanted you to understand the woman you chose." Daniel's fists clenched in his lap. His jaw worked, but no words came. His silence said more than anything: shock, betrayal, a dawning horror that the woman he trusted most had been poisoning his life from within. Caroline's voice suddenly cut back into the room, sharp and venomous. She had returned, her face flushed from tears or fury, I couldn't tell. "You're lying!" she screamed, pointing at me. "You've always hated me, Arthur. You would say anything to turn him against me." I didn't even glance at her. David pushed the folder across the desk, opening it to reveal the bank's stamped documents. "It's all here, Mrs. Miller. Forged signature, transaction history, loss of funds. This isn't Arthur's story. It's fact." Daniel's eyes dropped to the folder, scanning the black ink of betrayal. His hand trembled as he flipped through the pages. Finally, he shoved it closed, pushing it away like it was poison. He turned to Caroline, his voice hollow. "Is it true?" she stammered, reaching for him, her face crumbling. "Daniel, listen to me. Is it true?" His voice rose, sharp, breaking through the fog. Her silence was the answer. Daniel slumped back, his eyes glassy, his body heavy, as if the weight of every lie had just collapsed on his chest. Caroline reached for him again, but he recoiled, and the gesture might as well have been a knife. I stood then, towering above them both, my voice cut through the heavy air. "You have 24 hours, Daniel. Accept my challenge, and I will cover the debt, giving you the chance to earn this company the right way. Refuse, and you will lose everything, not because I took it, but because you never earned it." The grandfather clock struck the hour, its chimes reverberating through the study like a verdict. Daniel pressed his palms against his temples, his body trembling. Caroline sank back, her face pale, her eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. And I stood firm, the ghost of Linda's voice steady in my mind. "Stand your ground, Arthur. The boy must find his own way." The choice hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. The silence that followed was unbearable. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than the beating of my own heart. Daniel sat, hunched forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands tangled in his hair. His body trembled as though the weight of the world pressed against his shoulders. I had seen strong men break under pressure, but never had I seen my son so fragile, so utterly unmoored. Caroline, however, was anything but fragile. She straightened in her chair, her voice slicing through the air like broken glass. "Daniel, don't let him do this to you. Can't you see? He's trying to break you down so he can die knowing you suffered. This isn't about proving yourself, it's about him punishing you for not being his real son." Her words cut deep, and I saw Daniel flinch. For a moment, his eyes lifted to me, full of doubt and pain, but I didn't waver. I stood steady, like a stone wall against a storm. I answered her without raising my voice. "No, Caroline, this is not punishment. This is redemption. Blood doesn't make a man, it's what he does when the world forces him to choose. If Daniel takes the challenge, he becomes more than my son. He becomes a man worthy of the legacy Linda and I built together. And if he refuses, he walks away knowing he chose the easy path, the hollow path. The choice is his, not yours." Caroline sprang to her feet, pacing like a caged animal. Her heels struck the hardwood like hammer blows. "Daniel, think. 5 years of labor, 5 years of sweating like some common worker, while your father sits here in comfort, watching you break your back, laughing at your misery. You'll be nothing but his pawn." Daniel's voice cracked, hoarse with anguish. "Stop, Caroline." But she didn't stop. She whirled around, her face red, her eyes wild. "You can't do this. We had plans. We were going to sell the warehouses, invest, make millions. Don't throw it away for his ridiculous pride. If you walk out of this room without that company in your hands, you'll regret it forever." Her desperation filled the room, choking, ugly. I had seen many faces of greed in my life, but Caroline's was perhaps the ugliest, a mask stripped away, revealing nothing but hunger underneath. Daniel slammed his hand against the armrest, his voice breaking into a roar. "Enough!" His chest heaved, his eyes blazing as he looked at her with a fury I had never seen in him. "You lied to me, Caroline. You gambled with my name, with my future, and now you want me to gamble with my soul. I won't." The words hung there, vibrating through the air. For the first time, Caroline seemed truly stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for breath. I stepped forward, my hand resting on the edge of the desk. "Then you know your choice, Daniel. You have 24 hours. Accept my challenge, and I'll cover her debt, give you the chance to rise as a man. Refuse, and you both walk out of here with nothing but ashes." Daniel stood slowly, his posture stiff, his hands trembling. He didn't look at Caroline. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed somewhere far away, deep inside himself, where the battle raged. Finally, he whispered, "I need time." "Take it," I said softly, "but remember, time runs out at dusk tomorrow." He walked toward the door, his steps uneven, his shoulders heavy with conflict. Caroline rushed after him, clutching his arm with desperate claws. "Daniel, no. Don't let him do this. He's manipulating you. You're my husband. You belong to me." Daniel pulled his arm free with a force that sent her stumbling back. His voice was raw, trembling, but strong. "I don't belong to anyone, not even you." And the door slammed behind him, leaving Caroline standing in the study, her face twisted with fury and despair. She spun toward me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You've destroyed him. You've destroyed us. And when he comes to his senses, he'll hate you for it." I met her venom with silence. She waited for a reaction, for anger, for guilt, but I gave her none. At last, she let out a cry of frustration and stormed from the room, her footsteps retreating into nothing. The house fell quiet once more. The study, dimly lit by the soft glow of the lamp, felt almost sacred. On the shelf, Linda's photograph caught the light, her eyes gentle, her smile eternal. I stood there, staring at her image, my heart heavy but unbroken. "Linda," I whispered into the silence, "I hope I did right. The boy has to walk his own path now. All I can do is lay the stones beneath his feet." The only reply was the steady ticking of the clock. But in that silence, I felt her presence, like the warmth of a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. The battle wasn't over yet, but the truth had been spoken, and now the choice belonged to Daniel. The following evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the yard, the front door opened quietly. I had spent the day pacing the study, waiting for the decision that would shape not only Daniel's future, but the legacy of our family. My son stepped inside, alone, his shoulders slumped, his tie loose, his face pale from sleeplessness, but there was something different in his eyes, a flicker of resolve, fragile but real. He stood before me in silence for what felt like an eternity. The clock ticked, the wind rattled against the window panes, and still he said nothing. Finally, his voice broke through, hoarse but steady. "I'll do it. I'll take your challenge." I studied him carefully, searching for signs of hesitation. All I saw was weariness, fear, but beneath it determination. I nodded once. "Then tomorrow at 6, you'll be on site with the crew. No excuses." He swallowed hard but didn't argue. He only turned and left, closing the door behind him. That was the beginning of the hardest 5 years of his life. The first year was brutal. Daniel, who had spent his adulthood behind polished desks, now shoveled gravel, hauled lumber, and lifted steel beams beneath the scorching Sunday. His hands blistered, then bled, until calluses formed where once there had been softness. His back ached, his knees trembled, and more than once I saw him lean against his car at dusk, his face buried in his arms, fighting back tears of exhaustion. The men weren't kind. Tony barked orders. Jim mocked his clumsiness. They had no patience for a man they believed had tried to claim authority without earning it. "Silver spoon boy," I overheard one of them mutter. But Daniel kept showing up. Every morning before dawn, his truck pulled into the lot. Every night, no matter how sore or bruised, he dragged himself home. His pride burned hotter than his pain. By the second year, I began to see change. His posture was stronger, his movements surer. He no longer complained when Tony pushed him harder or when Jim laughed at his mistakes. Slowly, he laughed too at himself, at the ridiculousness of falling in mud or dropping a beam. His hands grew rough, his arms stronger, his skin weathered by wind, and Sunday the arrogance that had once coated his every word began to crack. Caroline, however, didn't last. Their arguments grew louder with each passing month. She mocked his boots, his dirty clothes, the smell of sweat clinging to him. "You're throwing your life away," she hissed. "You're letting him win." Daniel didn't answer her anymore. Some nights I saw him sleeping in his truck rather than go home to her venom. By winter's end, she was gone. A note on the counter, her closet emptied, her voice vanished from his life. Daniel never spoke her name again. The third year was the turning point. Daniel had become one of them, I watched as Tony clapped him on the back after a 14-hour shift, as Jim offered him a beer with no sarcasm attached. He began to lead, not with words, but with action. When a beam slipped from its chain, Daniel threw himself forward to steady it, bruising his shoulder in the process. When a younger worker nearly collapsed from heat, Daniel carried him to shade and poured water down his throat. Respect is a slow currency, but he earned it one act at a time. At night, when exhaustion threatened to consume him, I sometimes found him sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. His eyes no longer carried entitlement. They carried questions, thoughts, a weight that Linda would have called growth. The fourth year tested him more than the others. A project downtown fell behind schedule, and Daniel found himself managing crews in pouring rain and bitter winds. He didn't complain. He showed up every day, soaked to the bone, shouting orders through the storm, working harder than anyone else. Men began to follow him, not because of his last name, but because he had proven he could endure what they endured. I remember one evening he came to the study, dripping wet, his clothes caked in mud. He stood silently for a moment, then finally said, "Dad, I get it now. Why you never gave up. Why you treated them like family. It's not just about buildings, is it? It's about people." I felt Linda's presence then, as though she were standing beside me, smiling. The fifth year transformed him. Daniel no longer looked like the boy who had once demanded ownership. His arms were strong, his skin bronzed, his hands calloused and scarred. But more than that, his eyes carried something new: steadiness, humility, and quiet pride. He had learned the language of hard work, the rhythm of sweat and sacrifice. The men trusted him now, confided in him, followed him. On the morning of his last day as a worker, I met him at the site. The sun was rising, painting the steel skeleton of a new building in gold. Daniel stood there in his dusty boots, hard hat under his arm. He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw my son. Not the spoiled boy, not the broken man Caroline had twisted, but a leader. "Dad," he said, his voice steady, "I'm ready." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my eyes burning. "Then it's yours. 51% of Miller Construction. You've earned it." The men cheered that day. Tony hugged him like a brother. Jim bought the first round of drinks. For the first time, Daniel didn't stand apart from them. He stood among them. Months later, Daniel came to me with an idea. "I want to start something in Mom's name," he said. "A scholarship for kids who want to study engineering but can't afford it. She always believed in giving people a chance. It's time we carried that forward." And so, on a bright spring afternoon, we gathered in the rose garden Linda once tended. The air was sweet with blossoms, the bushes heavy with crimson blooms she had planted with her own hands. A small crowd filled the garden, employees, neighbors, their families. Daniel stood before them, taller, stronger, his presence calm and sure. He pulled the cover from a bronze plaque, the Linda Miller Scholarship Fund. The applause was loud, but what struck me most was the pride in his eyes as he spoke. "My mother taught me that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the lives you touch. This fund will honor her legacy by giving opportunities to those who need it most. Just as my parents gave me a chance, even when I didn't deserve it." As the crowd cheered, Daniel looked at me. His eyes were shining, but not with tears, with gratitude, with love, with the strength of a man who had finally found himself. I stood quietly at the edge of the garden, the roses swaying in the breeze, Linda's photograph heavy in my pocket. For the first time since she had left this world, I felt peace. My son had become the man she always hoped he would be, and he had done it not through inheritance, but through starting again from nothing. When I look back on it all now, I see more than just a company, or a conflict, or even a son learning to grow. What I see is the truth that wealth can be divided, but character must be earned. Buildings crumble, money changes hands, but the measure of a man is written in his choices, not in his inheritance. For years, I thought fatherhood meant providing a roof, a name, a company to pass down. But Linda, even in her absence, taught me something greater. Fatherhood is not about blood. It is about standing in the storm when your child falters, about giving him the chance to rise, even if it means letting him fall first. It is about loving enough to demand more. Daniel became my son twice in this life. The first time, by love. The second, by choice his own. He shed entitlement, endured hardship, and discovered that dignity isn't given, it's forged. And in doing so, he honored not just me, but the woman whose roses still bloom outside our window. I tell this story because I believe many of you carry your own burdens, your own fractured families, your own unanswered questions about worth and belonging. Maybe you wonder if your sacrifices matter, if your children see what you have given. I promise you, they do. It may take years, even decades, but truth has a way of breaking through, just as roses push through the soil each spring. So let this story remind you, your value is not measured in the wealth you leave behind, but in the character you inspire. You are more than bloodlines, more than titles, more than the mistakes of yesterday. You are the choices you make today, and the love you refuse to let die. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to stay with me for more. Share it with someone who needs hope. And tell me, where are you watching from? Because stories like this don't just belong to one family, they belong to all of us.